Hello, this is Professor James Strickler. This is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 11 about public policy. It's Lesson 1, which explains why we have public policy. In this lesson, you'll learn what public policy is, you'll learn about market failures, about social engineering, and about political ambition. So let's begin with the most basic question for this unit. What is public policy? Public policy consists of directives, in other words, orders of some sort, that guide what the government does. Public policy is about the things that the government engages in, the things that the government does. Public policy can either come from the Constitution or some laws passed by a Congress, or regulations from bureaucracy, or orders from judges, or whatever it may be. Somebody in government says, go do something. That's what public policy is. So why does the government choose, then, to go do things? Why do they create public policy? We're going to talk about 3 reasons why the government might create public policy. In other words, why the government might perform some sort of action or require that somebody perform some sort of action. The first of those is market failure. To understand what market failure is, we first have to remember what a free market is. A free market is an economic system where the people who participate in it can create, can sell, can buy whatever they want for whatever price they can agree upon. The free market is the basic assumption of how the American economy works. But sometimes the market fails. The background here for this slide is a particularly pronounced example of that when the stock market crashes. But that's not the only way that a market can fail. When we talk about market failure, we're talking about any situation where the private choices of people in the free market actually end up producing outcomes that society would rather not have happening. Let me give you a big example of this. Monopolies. Okay, a monopoly is a business enterprise that controls an entire portion of the economy. One of the classic examples of that from American history is the Standard Oil Company, which essentially at the beginning of the use of gasoline to fuel automobiles, things like that, Standard Oil controlled all the oil production in the United States of America. That's what a monopoly is, when you have one company that controls an entire segment of the economy. Now, the reason that that is considered bad is because monopolies can artificially raise prices. They can just decide that they're going to make things cost more than they otherwise would. But there's a problem, and that is that monopolies just sort of naturally happen in an economy. As businesses compete, one of them is better than the other and puts the other one out of business eventually. Even if you start out with 12 different businesses, after a while you've only got 11, then you've only got 10, etc. As they run others out of business, the better producing ones, eventually you're going to end up with just one that's in charge of everything. And at that point, hey, if anybody wants that product where they're selling, they're going to have to pay whatever that company wants for it. Now, that is generally considered bad for an economy, to have monopolies doing that sort of thing. So, some people in government will consider the creation of monopolies to be what we can call a market failure. In other words, people are allowed to freely engage in business as they saw fit. We ended up with monopolies, though, which are bad for people. And so the people who see that as a market failure then use that as a justification for the government stepping in and prohibiting monopolies to encourage free competition between businesses. So if politicians were to stand up and say, we need to pass a law to prohibit monopolies, the reason they would be giving for that is, yes, normally we like free markets, but in this case they're failing, they're not doing what is right for our society, so we need to step in and correct what the market is doing wrong. Some other examples of that could be pollution control. factories produce pollution, but they are not internalizing the cost of that pollution. In other words, the pollution goes out and does other bad things to other people, but the owners of the factory aren't paying for that. Another example might be product safety. People sell pills, and every now and then somebody dies from them because they're not formulated right, yet the company isn't stopped from doing it because, hey, the people are freely buying it. Another example would be military protection for the country. If you just leave it to the free market, probably aren't going to create an army that protects everybody. They would just create armies that would protect their own business interests. Another example could be road building. That if you just leave it to private individuals to build roads, we wouldn't end up with nearly as many roads as nearly as many places as we have them, and that's considered a social good that the market doesn't provide. So these are situations when politicians would at least argue, now you can make an argument against this, but politicians would at least argue that the market is failing to deliver in some way what society needs, or it's delivering the wrong thing, and so the government needs to step in and somehow control things to end up with the right outcome. All right, this is one of the reasons that government gives for engaging in public policy. In other words, using their government power to then dictate some sort of programs to do something. A second reason politicians might give for government action for the creation of public policy is what we can call social engineering. Now, they probably wouldn't use that name themselves for it, but this is a category of the kind of things that they do, although they might describe it differently. For example, they might use a term like social justice or something like that. But we're going to use this term social engineering as a more neutral term to describe what they'd be engaged in. An example of social engineering can be seen in the background photo of this slide. This depicts police officers having to escort buses of students to school. This had to be done back during the 1970s when they began to create racially integrated schools in places that had previously been segregated by busing children from one neighborhood of one particular race to schools in another neighborhood that were dominated by a different race. So you'd have white kids bused from the white neighborhoods to the black schools, black kids bused from the black neighborhoods to the white schools, etc. And there was a big backlash against this. A lot of people didn't like it, and they protested against it, argued against it, and so they felt to bring it about, they had to have these police escorts. Well, the reason this is an example of social engineering is that it shows the government using its power to adjust people's behaviors, to make them more fitting of what society would want, to make them more fair and just. Left to their own devices, the people would stay in segregated schools, for example. So the government's going to step in and say, no, we consider that to be socially incorrect, and so we're going to require you to behave in some sort of different way that we consider to be more fair and just, more equal, whatever it is. Now, you may notice that there's some blurring of lines here between market failure and social engineering. And that's certainly true. These aren't hard, fast categories. You could easily characterize one of these social situations as a market situation. You can characterize a market situation as a social situation. But nonetheless, these things can be arguably placed in these big categories. Let me give you a couple of other examples of a politician saying, engaging in social engineering as an excuse for public policy. One is just prohibiting various things as crimes. For example, drugs. The politicians decide that it's bad for people to be using heroin, for example, so they make it illegal. There was a time in this country that it wasn't illegal. And in that way, they are using their power of government to change certain people's attitudes and behaviors. They're creating public policy to formulate a better social situation, they believe. Another example is wealth redistribution, such as through food stamps and EBT cards, where they take money from one person and through the government they distribute it to somebody else. Take from the rich, give to the poor. Now, this is done for social reasons. They feel like, hey, those rich people should be being charitable, but they're not, so in a sense we're going to force them to be charitable by taking their money and giving it to somebody else. This is another example of social engineering, that society on its own should be taking care of these poor people, but it isn't, so the government's going to step in and formulate public policy to make it happen regardless. Now, a third possible reason for government action we will call political ambition. Here's an example of that sort of thing in the photo on this page. It shows a bunch of politicians cutting a ribbon, opening a new stretch of road that is actually called the Barack Obama Parkway near Orlando, Florida. Now, why would politicians do this? This is an example of public policy. They're using their power of government to cause some sort of thing to happen in society. In this case, the building of this road. Well, why would they do this? Well, they could claim market failure. Hey, there should be a road there, but the market isn't providing it. Or they could claim social engineering, that this will somehow open things and make society better, whatever. But the truth is, oftentimes, in situations like this, the real reason that they're going about creating this public policy is because they want the political benefits of it, to help them get ahead politically. They are politically ambitious. They want more power. And they see this as a way to get more power for themselves. Well, how so? How does engaging in things like this get them more power? Well, when they create public policy outcomes like this, arguably what they're really doing is buying votes. Well, how so? How are they buying votes? They are creating a public policy that benefits some group somewhere. Hey, we build a road for you. We build a bridge for you. We build a football stadium for you. Hey, we made those people stop discriminating against you. Oh, we got you food stamps so you have food on the table. Hey, we shut down those polluters. Whatever it is, they are doing something to benefit some group, and then they claim credit. Hey, you wouldn't have got that law to stop that polluting factory next door if it wasn't for me as the politician helping you. Therefore, you owe me. You should help me out. You should help me get reelected. Arguably, that's why politicians engage in all these public policies, is to just buy votes and get themselves elected. Now, they may say they're correcting a market failure, or they may say that they're trying to make society a better place, but probably most of the time, the real reason is they want to get reelected. All right, now let's review what we learned in this lesson. First of all, what is public policy? Is it democratic power? Is it some official aversion of events? Is it directives that create government actions? Or is it declassified material? Public policy consists of directives, or no, it's some sort of orders that then lead to some sort of actions by the government. The government can then be ordering private individuals to do things that they think are correct for the good of the public. What is a market failure? Is it supply equals demand? Is it that free choices create bad results? Is it that policies don't get approved? Or is it that prices rise quickly? Market failure is when the free choices of people in the free market create some sort of bad results that are considered to be socially wrong, and so the government has to step in and correct them, they believe. What is social engineering? Is it engaging in group projects? Is it repairing infrastructure, like roads and bridges? Is it creating fun public events? Or is it making people behave justly? Social engineering is making people behave justly. Somebody's treating someone else wrong, they're discriminating against them, or they're not helping the poor, or whatever it is. And the government's going to step in and make people behave in the socially correct way. How do politicians buy votes? Do they pay voters to vote for them? Do they make deals with other politicians? Do they create policies that help some voters? Or do they bribe electors? Politicians buy votes by creating policies that help some people, and then they believe that those people want to help them. And this is perhaps the main reason why politicians actually engage in public policy. While they may claim other reasons, this is probably what they're really doing. Okay, that completes this lesson. The next lesson will also be from Unit 11. It'll be Lesson 2 about public policy tools.